Hello, I'm Osmanqizi. You're watching Osmanqizi TV. Today is truly joyful, happy and historic day for millions of Azerbaijanis in Azerbaijan and abroad. After 28 years of Armenian occupation, the region of Lachin was reunited with the rest of the country, returned to the Azerbaijani administration. This was made possible in accordance with the three-side Russia-Armenia-Azerbaijan agreement achieved on November 10th. We joined to discuss the latest developments around this agreement and in the region. We're joined by Mr. Paul Goble. Thank you very much for joining us and discussing with us the issues.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Goble, I remember that in your interview right after signing of this agreement, you said that this is not a peace agreement, rather a ceasefire agreement. Now, three regions of Azerbaijan, Agdam, Kalbajar, and today Lachin, were handed over to Azerbaijani administration. What do you think? How do you evaluate the agreement now?
It's still a declaration rather than a final agreement. The November 10th document was described not as a treaty, but rather as a declaration. It was a statement of intent. There were large numbers of questions that were left open. We are seeing in the days since then some definition of some parts of the issues that are involved, but certainly far from all. To the extent that Baku, Moscow, Ankara, and Yerevan agree to cooperate, November 10th can become the basis for a final settlement. But there are many, many issues that we don't know exactly how things are going to be solved. And until we know more, I think it's a mistake to call it a peace settlement. I think it's more a statement of an intent on the part of the people immediately concerned to get to that point. That's progress. That's a good thing. But we have to see how far each party will go and how it will respond to what others do in trying to promote their interests. I'm delighted to see the return of Azerbaijani control to areas that were occupied by Armenia for so many years. That's a great thing. But not all the areas have been returned. And even the ones that you mentioned, Lachin, for example, it's being returned with Russian peacekeepers on it. That isn't completely the complete restoration of Azerbaijani administration, and that presents a potential problem for the people in the region. It is not. It may very well be that that was the only way to get this far, but it is not a final solution, but rather a move in the right direction.
Thank you for mentioning the administration problems with Lachin. What kind of future challenges do you see for Lachin, given that the corridor, the 5 kilometer corridor will be administered by Russian peacekeepers, and the Azeri residents of former Azeri residents of Lachin are not particularly thrilled about this, and they don't feel safe to return under these circumstances.
That's a problem. People don't want to go and be under Russian control any more than they wanted to be there under Armenian control. The problem, it seems to me, the most likely source of tension, however, is elsewhere. If you start from the idea that Russian peacekeepers must guarantee that the Lachin corridor remains open for Armenians between the Republic of Armenia and the Armenian districts of Karabakh, the question is, how much territory and how many people does the Russian side need to make that happen? The numbers so far are quite small, and the amount of territory next to the road is also small. But suppose there's an attack, suppose there's a provocation, and someone shoots at the road from a hillside. Is it going to be that the Russian peacekeepers will demand that they need more forces there and that they need to occupy more territory on both sides of the road? I'm not saying that will happen. I'm only saying that that's a real possibility. And the fact that there is no document, no agreement signed by all the parties that specifies exactly what the borders of the corridor will be means that there are likely to be disagreements. And if there are disagreements, there can be controversy.
The mandate of Russian peacekeepers also not decided. What do you foresee for the mandate-wise? Obviously, the Russian side will try to get some kind of mandate from OSCE, United Nations, elsewhere.
Well, the November 10th declaration called for the insertion of Russian peacekeepers. It did not specify exactly how many there would be, what their armaments would be, what their duties would be, whom they would have to report to, whose laws would be superior to the as far as their activities are concerned. All of those things, all of the absence of those things, opens the door to potential misunderstanding and disputes. I hope that there is goodwill. I hope that Azerbaijan, Russia, Turkey, and Armenia can all reach an agreement, can work together in a new post-Minsk group era to get an agreement on these issues. Until we have that kind of an agreement, the danger of something going wrong is all too great. I understand the Azerbaijanis who fled Lachin in 1993 and 94, not wanting to go back to that area if it is not under the control of Azerbaijani officials. They're going to complain about that. It's just the way human beings are. And if something goes wrong, that's going to be a political issue. So I hope that all sides will work together and we will move toward a peace settlement that would specify all these things. But until we have a lot more agreements in place than we do, it seems to me premature to call what happened on November 10th a peace agreement.
Another agreement was achieved, or at least announced today, between Turkey and Russia about joint monitoring center to function in the region. Now, it took 3 weeks to work out this document, this agreement. What's your take on that?
Well, I think 3 weeks is pretty fast. These are complicated issues, and the whole idea that there would be a joint Turkish-Russian monitoring center was not something anyone had been thinking about or negotiating over before November 10th. So 3 weeks is fairly fast. I think there are at least three things that we should keep in mind. First, there is a problem that this agreement was made between Turkey and Russia without apparently the direct participation of Azerbaijan. The monitoring center, as I understand it, will be on Azerbaijani territory. Azerbaijan, as an independent sovereign state, has a full right to have any military forces that it wants to be on its territory to be there. So this is not a question that Moscow has any say in as far as international law is concerned. This is a Azerbaijani issue, and Azerbaijan should have been a participant in the agreement, any agreement about a monitoring center. Second, having a monitoring center presupposes that you have capacities to monitor things and an understanding of what you're going to monitor and what you aren't. I haven't seen this agreement that was announced today, but I suspect that one of the big issues is, do you use drones? Do you use patrols? What kind of information will be released and to whom? Those are all issues that are pretty important. And I find it interesting that an agreement has been achieved so quickly. My fear is that the speed with which it has been concluded means that a lot of questions have been left open, and that opens the door again to dispute. And the third thing is this: if there is a monitoring center, what is its ability to cross into, or its representatives, to cross into areas that are behind Russian peacekeeping lines or that are still under some kind of Armenian occupation? What are the rules? Those are big issues. Those are things that will matter profoundly as to whether this agreement holds or it collapses. Again, one wants to have the parties all agree and cooperate, but at the same time, announcing you have an agreement and actually having one aren't the same thing.
Now, Russian peacekeepers, we've seen them in other post-Soviet countries, in Georgia, Moldova, and now in Karabakh. I wonder, what do you expect given its behavior in other regions? What should we expect in Azerbaijan?
The good news, and this I believe was achieved thanks to the efforts both of Baku and Ankara, is that the Russians this time around say they have only a 5-year term, that at the end of 5 years, they will either leave or an agreement will have to be extended. That's not true anywhere else in the former Soviet space. So the Russians are not there in exactly the same way they are elsewhere. On the other hand, we have seen everywhere that Russia has deployed forces what is commonly called among military specialists mission creep. In other words, you put people in for one purpose, but you keep adding responsibilities and you keep adding people. It's one thing if Moscow has 2,000 lightly armed peacekeepers who are facilitating keeping transit corridors open. It's another if after a few months there are 5,000 Russian peacekeepers and they are heavily armed and they are quite capable of contesting military units from the sovereign states in the area. That's a huge issue. Again, one hopes that the Russians will live by the rules. Tragically, their track record is not one that gives that much confidence.
Well, in another post-Soviet country, Moldova, things are starting to shake, and the new incoming Moldovan president, Maya Sandu, spoke openly about necessity or withdrawal of Russian troops from Transnistria. Now, what are your expectations? Because so far the Kremlin denies its comments and says that it will destabilize the situation in the region. What do you anticipate?
Russia is going to say any withdrawal of Russian troops anywhere is destabilizing. That's just what they're going to say. I could have drafted that statement for Russia a long time before Ms. Sandu was elected president of Moldova. Having said that, I'm sure Russia is going to be very reluctant to pull its troops out of Transnistria for the simple reason that if they go, Chisinau will be able to restore its control over Transnistria rather quickly. The likelihood is that there will be moves to possibly unite Moldova with Romania, something that's been discussed. If that happens, then that is one way for the further eastern expansion of NATO, since Romania is a NATO member, something Moscow does not want to see happen. Even if you don't move, if Chisinau doesn't move in the direction of unity with Romania, I think you will see Ms. Sandu's program is intended to further integrate Moldova with Western Europe, with the European Union, and with NATO on her own. That being true, the Russians want leverage. I'm worried not just about Russian troops in Transnistria, but I'm worried also about the likelihood that Moscow will begin to exploit the Gagauz minority in the southeastern part of the country, a Turkic but Orthodox Christian community that speaks a language very similar to Anatolian Turkish, and that has been used by Moscow against Chisinau. And I think anyone concerned with the Turkic world needs to be worried about the Gagauz and not simply Transnistria when it comes to Moldova.
Speaking of Transnistria, some people in Azerbaijan see it as a possible model. If Moldova, as an independent country, is successful in having Russian peacekeepers finally withdraw, that may be a good pattern that Azerbaijan could follow, say, in 5 years. Now, what is your expectation? Do you anticipate a military standoff? Do you think it is, and especially given that Moldova has a backing, as you said, of Romania, do you anticipate EU or United States show active support to Moldova in this effort?
I would like to believe that the EU, NATO, and the United States would all encourage the withdrawal of Russian peacekeepers. I think that Moldova should be allowed to restore its sovereignty over the entire area. I would certainly urge people in Azerbaijan to look at the history of Transnistria more broadly, and what they will see is that Moscow has violated most of its promises and pledges in the past, and therefore it's entirely possible that they will do so again. I very much hope that President Aliyev and Turkey make it clear to Moscow that the presence of Russian troops is limited to 5 years, not that it's going to be renewed. I think that needs to be made very clear, and I believe that Azerbaijan's diplomatic partners in the West, including the United States and the major European powers, should make that clear as well. Otherwise, there will be mission creep, not only in size, but in length. And I think it's critically important that we bring this to an end, that too many people have had to live as internally displaced persons in Azerbaijan, and they must be allowed to go home.
Now, from day one, we've been hearing calls from Azeri public about replacement of Russian peacekeepers in Azerbaijan, and in contrast with that, with public, the president of Azerbaijan, Aliyev, is not joining these calls, at least not till now. And your take on that, and also France and United States seem to have their own behind the doors negotiations going on about possible replacement of Russian peacekeepers. What do you think their interests are, and how do you see their perspective?
Well, I'd make a couple points. First, we need to understand that peacekeepers by international law are not supposed to come from neighboring countries or countries that are immediately involved in the conflict. Russia should not be able to have peacekeepers on Azerbaijani territory. Turkey should not have peacekeepers on Azerbaijani territory. Peacekeepers under international law are supposed to come from third countries not involved in the conflict, not having taken positions on one side or the other. That's the very first thing. Azerbaijan is free to invite Turkish military forces to be on its territory for basing whatever, for defense and so on. But if we're going to call these people peacekeepers, they should conform to international law. And I very much hope that the international community, including Western Europe and the United States, will insist that that peacekeepers, if that's what we're going to call them, come from places like Sweden or Australia or someplace far away. Second point, if that doesn't, we have to understand that the November 10th agreement or declaration was something where all three of the parties got something they wanted and gave up something they wanted. That's what happens in a negotiation. Azerbaijan was able to restore a great deal of its sovereignty and get a reaffirmation of international recognition of its territorial integrity, but it wasn't allowed or able or willing or permitted to retake all Azerbaijani territory under its control. Armenia lost control of the 7 buffer zones and half or so of Karabakh itself, but it got something terribly important. The intervention of Russia when it happened meant that Armenia did not lose its armed forces. Had the war continued for another week or two, the Armenian army would have been surrounded and either destroyed or at least disarmed. Armenia would have been left with nothing to defend itself, and it would have become a likely candidate for victimization by somebody. Russia didn't want Armenia to lose completely or Azerbaijan to win completely, and it very much wanted to get its troops back on the ground in the area to indicate Russia has a right to be there and has the power to do things. At the same time, in order to get those things, Russia managed to offend the Armenian nation to the point that Armenia is no longer in Russia's corner. Azerbaijan, there are many people who were suspicious of Russian intentions, and with good reason. And so Russia did not win big here either. Again, it's pluses and minuses. I think it's terribly important that the Russian forces be there for as short a time as possible, that they be replaced if peacekeeping is how this is going to proceed, that they be replaced by third country neutrals who would be real peacekeepers in the UN international law routine, and that until that happens, that we get some very precise rules written in an agreement that involves all the parties, not simply be a Russian diktat or a Russian agreement with Turkey over the heads of Baku. I don't think that will work either.
You've been following closely Kremlin's policy for years. How much do you think compromise or even defeat is for Moscow? Is it seen as a compromise or defeat for Moscow to have Turkey in the region?
This is a bigger defeat that Russia has suffered in a very long time. This is the very first time on the territory of what was the Soviet Union, minus Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, which were never legitimately part of the USSR, where there are troops of a third country present. That's an amazing thing. That's something that is so at odds with what Vladimir Putin wants. He wants this to be an area of Russian dominance, Russian exclusive zone. Russia has suffered a huge defeat. Many people still are impressed by the bombastic statements that Mr. Putin and the Russian government make. But Russia is in a vastly weaker position today than it was 5 years ago. It's isolated because of its illegal annexation of Crimea. It's isolated because of its promotion of carving out parts of the Republic of Georgia. It's under a sanctions regime that's becoming increasingly harsh. Its economy is sinking at the rate of 5 to 7% a year. Its oil prices are at a level which do not allow the support of any kind of forward Russian military presence. You look around the former Soviet space, and what you see are governments that are looking increasingly to anybody but Moscow. Baku is now very much part of the Turkish world and sees itself as a partner of Ankara. Armenia has looked to France rather than to Russia, and will do that even more given this agreement. Georgia is hoping to join NATO and the EU ultimately. There are no countries in the former Soviet space that line up squarely and all the time with Russia. Even Belarus has tried to put its distance with Russia. That's an amazing thing. I mean, if you look at the facts on the ground, as opposed to Mr. Putin's press releases, what you see is that he and his country are in retreat. They're not moving forward. Had they had as much power as many people like to think they do, they would have been able to intervene easier and more quickly than they did in the last outburst of war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So yes, Turkey's presence in Azerbaijan is a huge defeat for Russia. It is a measure of how much Russian power has receded, and the fact that Azerbaijan is simply asserting its rights as a sovereign, independent country says a great deal. One would have found it absolutely unthinkable 20 years ago to imagine Azerbaijan asking for Turkish troops on its territory without making sure that wouldn't invite a Russian response. Now Russia has to talk about who's in a monitoring group, what its duties are. Those are fundamentally different issues than was the case 10, 15, 20 years ago. And it reflects a victory for Azerbaijan, a victory for Turkey, and definitely, in its own mind, a defeat for the Russian Federation.
Now, how do the EU and United States fit the picture? I mean, you say it's a defeat for Russia. Do you think Turkish presence is supported by EU and United States, because it didn't enjoy much support in Syria, Libya?
I don't think the EU or the United States have played much of a role in recent weeks or months. That doesn't mean that they won't each try to promote their own interests in the coming months. The United States is in a kind of interregnum. We will have a new president at the end of January, and his policies, he's made very clear, will be very different than the current president. I think they will be more about saving NATO. I think they will be more about saving multilateralism. I think they will be more about demanding that Russia live according to the rules rather than allowing Russia to do what it wants because it has nuclear weapons. So I would suspect that in the coming months you will see an American position that is increasingly supportive of NATO as an institution, and therefore Turkey as a member of NATO. And if what Turkey is doing is well within the NATO charter, it's well within Turkey's rights and Azerbaijan's rights, and therefore I think you will see American support for it, because I don't think a Biden administration will want to do anything that will call the NATO alliance into question. And so Turkey will be deferred to on this issue precisely because the Americans want to make sure that NATO continues to be a vibrant and important institution. With respect to the Europeans, and they speak with so many voices, it's difficult to say Europe is, it's really Europe are. I think you will see, as we've already seen, some kind of emotional response in France in support of Armenia. There are historical and cultural reasons for that. But I think what you will also see is the dominant power in Europe is certainly Germany. And I'm quite confident that Germany will back both Azerbaijan's territorial integrity and its right to have Turkish forces on its ground if it chooses to. And it will take the same position, incidentally, with respect to Russian peacekeepers. If Azerbaijan has agreed to this, then I think you'll see German support for that. That's why, in my mind, it's so terribly important for Azerbaijan and Turkey to make it clear that Russian peacekeepers in the Karabakh area are a short-term phenomenon, not something that are going to be with us a decade from now.
Now, on Turkey's rapprochement with Ukraine, how is that seen from Kremlin, and what role can Turkey play in Ukraine's fight for its sovereignty?
Well, the Turks are an important regional power. They have the ability, they control some important real estate, and most importantly, the straits, through which a lot of trade from Ukraine to the world has to pass, and through which a lot of Russian trade to the world has to pass. Turkey has a great deal of influence and power, and I think that you will see its leaders increasingly using that. Turkey forming a more cooperative relationship with Ukraine works for both countries' benefits. It doesn't necessarily presage the end of the Russian occupation of Crimea, but it certainly gives Kiev another bow or an arrow in its quiver in dealing with Moscow. So I see it as a positive development, and one that I would expect to see Turkey build on with developing relations elsewhere as well.
Now, in his address to nation today, President Ilham Aliyev talked about a possible five-side economic cooperation between Azerbaijan, Armenia, Russia, Iran, and Turkey. He even said that we already have preliminary agreement with Turkey, Erdogan, and Putin. He said we discussed it with Putin because 100% of Armenia's railway is controlled by Russia. But he said that Armenia is welcome to join this cooperation. Now, this is not a particularly popular rhetoric in Azerbaijan after the war, understandably, but what chances do you see for this cooperation, and do you see a will by Armenia to join the one?
Well, as you pointed out, the Armenian railroad is in fact a Russian railroad. Russia owns it, Armenia doesn't. I understand that Azerbaijanis, having had to live with Armenian occupation of part of their country and the IDPs that fled from there for almost 30 years, can't be pleased about any cooperation with the people who did it. On the other hand, one of the things that came out of the November 10th declaration that is terribly important for Azerbaijan and also for Turkey is the reopening of a transportation corridor, you call it what you like, between Azerbaijan proper and Azerbaijan's breakaway, or Azerbaijan's republic, Nakhchivan, because that gives you a land corridor from Baku to Istanbul, at least potentially. That won't happen unless the Armenians get some kind of reassurance that they will also have transportation corridors north, south, and east, west. The Armenians will just simply create problems in Zengezur, and that will cost Azerbaijan a great deal if it insists on only one side being filled. The other thing is this. When President Aliyev spoke today about a five-part agreement, I think his real audience was not the Azerbaijani people, but the international community. This was a very smart set of words for that audience. It suggests that Azerbaijan wants to be a good player, wants to cooperate. That will be welcome in all kinds of capitals. It will put the pressure on Armenia to cooperate, and it will put pressure on Russia, which has been Armenia's chief prop, to cooperate as well. And bigger than that, and I think this is what President Aliyev and his staff were thinking about. This is a way forward beyond Minsk. This is the beginning of the drawing of a new architecture for talks in the South Caucasus that will not be kept within the Minsk format, but will be transformed and will be more immediately involve more immediately all the countries in the region, including Turkey and Iran, and will therefore be in a better position to reach some of the agreements that, with respect, the Minsk group hasn't been able to do. I think that President Aliyev has been very smart in the way he has played both this war, the latest fighting, and the settlement. During the war, he divided his forces and by envelopment accomplished more than a straight attack would have. And second, the agreement, by ending the conflict before there was an issue that would involve the destruction of the Armenian army, he looks like the responsible player. Azerbaijan looks like the generous country that can afford to make peace. And I believe over time that will win ever more support in Europe and the West. I think that when a president speaks, he's always speaking to more than one audience. And in this case, I think the more important audience was beyond the borders of Azerbaijan than within it.
Mr. Paul Goble, thank you very much. We
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.